Hello.
Hello.
Yeah, well, we will start by my opening
We can
remark.
start now.
Well, dear colleagues and friends, I am Homin Jang. On behalf of KIPABiC and webinar organizing team, I warmly welcome you to today's webinar on risk assessment and risk management at SBSTTA 27, Discussions from Asian Perspective. We are very pleased to see participants joining us from across Asia and beyond. The focus of our session, RARM, is timely and critical. The 27th meeting of the subsidiary body on scientific, technical, and technological advice, SBSTTA 27, will take place soon from 20 to 24 this month in Panama. Well, one of the key agenda items is RARM of living modified organisms. This issue is central to the effective implementation of the content protocol on biosafety, especially in view of new and emerging biotechnologies. At the request of several countries in Asia, this webinar has been convened to provide an opportunity to discuss the agenda on RARM so that we approach SBSTTA 27 with greater technical clarity. On a personal note, in the past, when I was working with the Korean Biosafety Clearinghouse, I had the opportunity to participate in such meetings at common level. I have seen firsthand how valuable these preparatory exchanges are in enabling countries to engage more confidently and effectively in informed discussions and global forums. The objective of this webinar are to provide participants with insights into the issues and the discussion at SBSTTA 27 on RARM, which is agenda item 7, and facilitate dialogue that will strengthen the preparedness and effective engagement of Asian countries in the upcoming negotiations. Today's session has been convened in collaboration with the United Nations Environment Programme, UNEP, Biotech Consortium India Limited, BCIL, and partner countries in Asia, and the UNEP JEF multi-country biosafety project involving Bangladesh, India, Mongolia, and the Philippines. We are privileged to have with us distinguished panel experts who would share their perspectives and experiences. I encourage all the participants to engage actively in the discussion. Please share your questions in the Q&A chat box. And kindly note, this webinar is being recorded and the link will be shared with you afterwards. With that, let us begin. It is my honor to invite Dr. Owusu-Biney, Global Biosafety Portfolio Manager at UNEP, to deliver the first presentation, an overview of SBSTTA 27 and the RARM agenda and the discussion. Yeah, please, Dr. Alex. Dr. Alex.
Dr. Alex, can you please start? Thank you.
Okay. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Before I start, on behalf of UNEP and Jeff and then colleagues in the project, we want to extend our solidarity with the government and people of the Philippines as it was announced this morning of an earthquake. I trust that you are all safe and your families are doing well. We are with you in this time. Thank you. Now I'll give a quick overview of SBSTTA 27 and to set the tone and the agenda for risk assessment and risk management, agenda item 7. What we found the last 10 years or so is that for some countries, the teams that support the CBD and its protocols, because of course retirement and leaving, the staff and teams tend to change. Some countries are able to pass on knowledge. Some are still in the middle of those process. So we just keep sometimes reminding ourselves. Now, for every convention or treaty, there's always a scientific or technical group to serve, to give advice on trends and issues that they have to look at, or to advise as requested by the COP. In the case of the CBD, is SBSTTA, which is a subsidiary body on scientific, technical, and technological advice to COP and the MOPs of the two protocols. Now, the primary role of the SBSTTA, as I said,
Dr. Alex, are you showing
hello?
the slide? Are you showing the slides?
Yes.
But
Yes, can you see it?
No, we can't see the
No,
slides.
we didn't
Okay,
see.
just a minute.
Please.
Can you see?
No, not yet. Not yet.
It's interesting.
Can you reshare
Okay,
it
just a
again?
minute.
Actually, your
That's what I
video
want
is
to do
also
here.
on. Yeah.
Okay. Can you see now?
It is coming. Just, yeah, now we can see.
Okay.
Yes. Slide number 3. Yes.
Okay, so I'm not too sure what is happening, but let me go back to, okay. Confirm when you can see the full screen. Are you able to see the full screen now?
Now we can see the full screen.
Okay, so as I said, SBSTTA provides technical advice with recommendations. Note, SBSTTA's function is to provide recommendations, not obligatory decisions, and is mandated for the Convention on Biological Diversity. Article 25 gives that mandate, and the same SBSTTA serves as the technical and scientific advisory group to the two protocols. So Article 27 and Article 30 for the protocol and 27 for the Nagoya gives that function. But if a party is not a party to the two protocols, then the recommendation is not to them. That is why you see in the Bureau, if country X is a party to the convention, but not party to the two protocols, there's a substitute. Now, this is a subsidiary to the main convention and its advisory, as I said. Now, what is the focus of SBSTTA? Is to provide scientifically accurate assessment and recommendations on biodiversity issues. It's expert-driven to discuss best practices and also discuss scientific findings, assessments, and reviews. They support negotiations to inform what would normally be the political negotiations based on the science available, and they offer advice. So the COP, the protocols, the Bureau can also still request for any advice, and SBSTTA does that. The challenge that sometimes the CBD and the bureaus face is that countries don't nominate technical experts. SBSTTA is not like the COP. This is basically for scientific experts and for people who can provide advice on the ground on the issues. So I would want to suggest to you all that in nominating your teams, if not, I'm sure you've done already, but it's something you should look at, because sometimes when you go to COPs, SBSTTAs, the delegations are not able to contribute because they see it as a negotiation. When SABSTA recommendations are made to the COP, of course, it's now open for further negotiations by the parties. So that is for SABSTA. Now, I've said, as you prepare for the SABSTA 27, be reminded that there have been more than 200 recommendations since the CBD came into force. You can find it on their website. This is the 27th meeting, which will be held in Panama City in the 20th, 24th, as Dr. Jang said. But prior to that, there will be also a workshop on assessments done by ICBES. This all fits into the SABSTA discussions. And when you are preparing for any convention meetings, look at the provisional agenda, which will be accepted after the meeting starts, and the annotated agenda that will give detailed issues on what there is going to be discussed. Then you look at both the information documents and official documents. Because science is big, and also not to digress, normally a scenario note is set that shows you what is going to be looked at so that you have a fair idea of what you are going to discuss. The operations and procedures are guided by the modus operandi for the COP, so that does not change much. And also look at the meeting documents. Otherwise, you'll get lost in the discussions without some background preparations. And your national experiences captured is very important. Other reports and what has been done helps you to be able to contribute. So that is in some of the potential issues you should consider as you go to SABSTA 27. Now, as I said, I have a flow chart here. I will not go too much into it, but the discussions in the case of agenda item 7 on risk assessment and risk management will be guided by the COP MOB decision 11.7. And there will be consideration of party submissions on their needs and priorities for further additional guidance materials on specific topics that will come out, and a rationale following the criteria set in the annex to COP MOB decision 9.13. You know, there have been a voluntary guidance and also an additional guidance on engineered gene drives. They would expect parties to share their experiences and also to make suggestions and recommendations on whether what we have is enough or there's a need for further guidance materials, or some may share even some materials they have developed themselves. They will establish an ad hoc expert group on risk assessment to look at the needs and priorities that have been identified. The terms of reference already decided in COP MOP 11. The Secretariat, which is not there yet, I have not seen it. The Secretariat will bring a note summarizing all the submissions, and also the report of the expert ad hoc group will be put in for your consideration. Based upon all this and the discussions, recommendations will be prepared for COP MOP 12 for discussions. So that is what Agenda 7 will look at. What are some of the key outcomes of the meetings? There will be several outputs that may come out, but the main outcome will be the recommendations that will go to COP 17 and COP MOPs of the protocols. And that is the function of SABSTA. I think I'm done. If there are any questions or clarifications. But before that, as for those who be involved in conventions, note that between any two COPs, there are several intersectional activities, and it's important to follow the trends to guide your contribution both to SABSTA and to the COPs and the MOPs. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you so much for giving this background. As you rightly pointed out, there are many times new officials who have to participate and also the stakeholders who are not so familiar with the process.
I forgot.
And this has been really an opening, very clear and remarks from your side for understanding what is the SBSTTA and what we have to do. So I will get back to you with questions, if any, they appear on the chat box. But meanwhile, we will continue with our next component of the webinar, which is the panel discussion. And we want to focus today on the risk assessment and risk management agenda. As Alex pointed out, this is an important agenda. But continuing with what Alex pointed out, that there are many times people who are not familiar with what has happened before and what is the context of the discussions which are going to happen in this SBSTTA. I have prepared a small presentation which I will share and then move on to our panelists. I will introduce them one by one as we go along. So just to give you, continuing with Alex, I'll just share my slides. Are my slides visible? I'll just put them in the slideshow. Can you see my slides? Yeah. Right, okay. Thank you. So as Alex pointed out that in the upcoming SBSTTA, this one of the agenda items is risk assessment and risk management. And the issues which are being discussed is preparation of the guidance material for new categories of LMOs. So just to give you a contextual background to many of our participants who are probably not familiar with what has happened under the Carino protocol on RARM, there are two articles in the Carino protocol on biosafety, Article 15, which is on risk assessment, and Article 16 on risk management, which establish the requirements for risk assessment. But to support this process, there is a detailed Annex 3, which sets forth the objective of the risk assessment, what the risk assessment will be used for, general principle that the risk assessment must follow, and most importantly, methodology of the risk assessment and points to consider. So this is a very broad outline of how the process should proceed and provides a lot of guidance. Without taking too much time, because we are not going into the details of the risk assessment, this is what the Annex 3 highlights are. Annex 3 methodology will say we should identify what are the hazards, what are the exposure and likelihood assessment, what are going to be the consequences of that hazard. And we characterize that risk, and in the end, we prepare a report of that particular LMO using this methodology. And then if there are any issues, then risk management is done. So this is in brief, what Annex 3 methodology calls for doing risk assessment of any ML level. Now, further to implement this, to how do we take forward? As we all know that risk assessment of LMOs is based on comparative assessment. So every LMO we have to see whether it has characteristics similar to the comparator. And for doing that, we need to know about that particular organism. So familiarity about the biology of that organism, introduced trait, receiving interaction is very important. And then comes the most important part, problem formulation, which is referred to as a problem formulation network. This framework is basically to see that if there are any differences that we find through comparative approach, whether they are going to have any significant adverse effect on valued entities. Now, this particular problem formulation framework is the heart of risk assessment and has been successfully applied to various kinds of living modified organisms which are already released by the countries and are already in use. So I will just take you very quickly to what has been the work done so far mainly related to the guidance under the Carino protocol. The discussions started in the 2004, where it was proposed that if there are any gaps in the existing approach, any detailed guidance is required. And then it took almost 12 years, one architect, another architect, testing of the guidance, and so on and so forth. But still there were some divergent opinions, and finally we got what we call as voluntary guidance. And this voluntary guidance is also based on case-by-case assessment and calls for the application of problem formulation approach to undertake the risk assessment. So after this, sorry, I think I have missed one slide. After this, there have been a lot of requests by the parties, for preparation of additional guidance on various topics, as was asked by the Secretariat from time to time. So this list keeps growing every year. Every 2 years, the Secretariat asks, because there are significant advances going on in biotechnology and new categories of LMOs are coming and ready for commercialization. And divergent views of the parties are there in many of these topics also. And also, as I said, the guidance itself was a little not all parts were agreed, and that's why it is called voluntary guidance. And because there are some parties will say that they want additional guidance on a topic, others will say not required. So based on a lot of discussion, a process was established for the identification and prioritization of the specific issues. And this was done in COPMOP 11 to consider whether additional guidance material is required. I think it was done in 10, I'm sorry. So criteria for the parties agreed for a set of criteria which are to be followed. And these criteria, the most important one is number 3, where it says that if you have existing risk assessment frameworks, guidance and methodologies already in place, and the issue at hand has already been assessed with existing risk assessment frameworks, then, but still, in spite of all that, if there are specific methodological challenges, that is what would require further attention. So now onwards, what has happened is that every topic which is suggested by any party has to actually evaluated through these criteria before it is considered by, as Alex mentioned, by the substa or by the bodies set up like ad hoc expert technical group, by the Secretariat and so on. I mean, it passes through the process. Now, Substa 27, which Alex mentioned, in between, I would also like to mention that over the years, one of the topics which caught the attention of the parties and was actually subjected to the preparation of the additional voluntary guidance material is gene drives. So in the previous COP, it was decided that that a guidance is required for gene drives because it has a very special characteristics, and based on that, a guidance was prepared and accepted by the COP last in the COPMOP previous COPMOP. But here it is very important to note, because we don't have enough time and we are going to talk about substa, I would request you to look at that guidance document. I only wish to apprise you that the guidance for gene drives uses the same problem formulation approach, which is actually defined in Annex 3, and it has been agreed that the approach can be successfully applied for the assessment of gene drive mosquitoes. So now, in the intersessional period, as Alex said, there are a lot of activities. So in that, the parties were requested to give their feedback on various topics on which they feel that additional guidance is required. In total, 12 parties gave 15 topics submitted to the Secretariat. Actually, 12 parties gave a lot of material, and then there was also an online forum. Based on the comments received and the online forum, the Secretariat extracted 15 topics on which there were a lot of discussions, and subsequently the ACTEC, meeting of which was held, has suggested to SBSTTA that the process may be initiated for additional voluntary guidance materials on 4 topics, which is the living modified algae, microorganisms, living modified microorganisms, living modified organisms expressing genome editing machinery for pest or pathogens, and living modified fish. Here, I would just like to add also that living modified fish earlier also appeared as a topic, but because there were a lot of guidance already available, it was not agreed in the last COP to be considered for new guidance. But however, it has come up again. In addition to that, based on the points raised, there is a request for developing detailed technical notes on voluntary use of long-term and cumulative effects of genetic constructs and living modified organisms, operationalizing protection goals into relevant assessment and measurement endpoints, and the use of LMOs in the centers of origin and in traditional agriculture. So this is where we are now, and we have a very, very esteemed panel today with us who will guide us on what happened in the attack and what are the views from the parties, representatives, experts actually who have been associated with this process of negotiations for several years, and we will have feedback from them. So now I would like to introduce to you our panel. We have Dr. Felicity Keiper, who is from BASF, and she has been a member of the ACTEC, on risk assessment, and she also represents Global Industry Coalition. We have Dr. Flerida Carino, who is the consultant. It's been a long-standing for many, many years. She has participated in the negotiations, a professor, but more involved in the regulations, I would say, in addition to her teachings. And currently she is a consultant to Philippines Food and Drugs Administration. And we have Dr. Bayarkhuu. She is the director of Biosafety Research Institute in Mongolia. Previously, she was in the government and also has an extensive experience in the negotiations. And we have a representative from Korea, Dr. Seok Lee, who works with the Korea Institute of Biosciences and Biotechnology. He has also been a member of the ad hoc technical expert group on risk assessment, which deliberated on these topics and has given their recommendations. So we have a very good panel here, and maybe without wasting much time, I would like to proceed with seeking views from all our members on various aspects of this, And to start with Dr. Lee, we'll start with Dr. Lee because these are all, the requirement of guidance originates from advances in biotechnology, and Dr. Lee represents the research community, which is, developing new LMOs. So I would request Dr. Lee, your initial remarks on what are the perspectives on regulatory approaches to new biotechnologies, so that all these innovations that are happening in the research institutions, they are balanced with responsible regulation. So we don't want high regulation or low regulation or whatever. So I would like to hear from you, and I mean the audience will be greatly benefited by your point of view. Over to you.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah. My name is Seok Lee from South Korea, and I'm working at the Bioevaluation Center of the Korea Institute of the Bioscience and Biotechnology, and I'm working for the biotech research field, and also that my main research field is at the molecular characterization of the LMO for risk assessment. So before start my words, that I just wanna show you something. In last SBSTTA 26, Africa group said that they said Africa is aware of the advances of gene driving technology And Africa welcomes the guidance of material as an important tool in regulation of the ongoing and future research on engineered gene drive living modified organism prior to release in the environment. And there are some sentences, and what this means is that if you want to do something with the LMO, or not even just with the LMO, for everything, regulation should be there. If there is no regulation, that means we cannot do anything. So people, some serious scientists or engineers or industrial sector people think that if there is no regulation, they think that some people, they can do everything. But actually that is not true. There should be a regulation, and then fulfill the regulation requirement, then it can be commercialized. So for commercialization, simply saying that to make the money, so there should be a regulation in nationwide and also worldwide. So this Africa group talk in the last SBSTTA 26 shows that everything is making clear that Africa is suffered or the burden of the malaria, and that host is that mosquito. And also we expect gene drive mosquito can figure out that serious issue with the malaria, but before release to environment and applied, there should be a regulation and safety guideline. And I think this can show clear about what regulation is required. And another one to say is that all this kind of conflict is come from that actually GEO genome editing technology, and followed by that synthetic biology before it shows up in early 20s, early 2000, and there simply that what LMO regulation is solely based on that LM plant. But after GEO comes out, then their regulation and their categories are really bit confusing because of the because of we cannot decide it is really LMO or it is LMO, but what I'm saying is it is almost same to natural spontaneous mutations or something like that. Then synthetic biology is followed up by the GEO, and this definition of LMO is kind of start confusing. And somehow when I attend 3 meetings, one is that SBSTTA 26 and COP 11, last COP 11, and then this ATEC 3 meetings. And what I found is that everybody talking about the synthetic biology and LMO and everything, but except for LMO, the definition and range is not clear. That's the most key. But we talk about this, and the other colleagues said that it is already discussed in past meetings, last meetings and old meetings, and we have no room to discussion for that definition and range again and again and again, and they cannot repair it. So it's moving that synthetic biology and the risk assessment and the GEOs. The discussion is that right now is moving, but industrial grows fast, and they start to make the really money-making products from the science and engineering and industry sector. But regulation is a little bit slower than that. That's the big issue. So in science, the viewpoint of the science and the engineering and the industrial sector, that is the regulation status should be catch up for the use of technology. That is the kind of very conflict and tough part of this discussion. Yeah, that's all my talk from my last 3 meeting experience. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lee. Regulation should definitely be there, and that is why I said the responsible use of technology is very important. And I think, as Dr. Alex pointed out, that the Carino protocol itself calls for the biosafety regulatory frameworks, and we have in several countries the frameworks and the guidelines. So much of effort went under the protocol also, and the protocol itself calls for risk assessment prior to use of any product, and that is why Annex 3 has been provided to provide everyone a methodology that should be followed before we do the further environmental risk assessment. I think the issue for consideration here for SBSTTA is that we have a guidance already, and we have a methodology which has been provided under the Carino protocol. The question is whether we need a different framework or more detailed guidance or for new categories of LMOs. And as was decided, as I mentioned briefly, that any such topic for which additional guidance is required has to pass through a certain process, and one of which is whether problem formulation or any existing approaches are applicable or not. So we have with us Dr. Flerida Carino, who has been, working as a regulator in Philippines and has been associated with risk assessment of several LMOs. Several GM crops were released under her as when she was a member of that, and given very, very useful risk assessment frameworks, documents. So Dr. Flerida, I would like to request you to tell us on this problem formulation approach to LMOs, which is like, used for LMOs, and as I said, is considered to be very widely applicable. Your experience in using this problem formulation approach, and also indicating, that how effective it is for the assessment of LMOs or any other categories of chemicals and so on and so forth. Over to you, because Dr. Carino is also an expert in the chemical risk assessment. Over to you.
Okay, thank you, Vibha. Just a point of clarification. I'm not really part of the regulatory system. I'm a what I classify myself is I am a risk assessor more than the actual part of the official regulatory offices here in the Philippines. Nevertheless, I've participated in several COPMOPs, and I have always maintained that what we have in Annex 3 is sufficient in all the cases that I've seen for the LMOs, and that no new documents should actually be crafted by anybody. That is a broad document, voluntary as it may be. I think that the problem formulation approach has been espoused by the OECD and articulated also in the gene drive documents would be sufficient as of now for all the LMOs and possible other products of different technologies that may crop up in the near future. I'd just like to give a very, very brief overview of the problem formulation approach, which I think is a generalized way of focusing your risk assessment. It follows a general trend of hazard identification and consequences, as well as exposure to be able to come up with a risk characterization, which after, as you've said, after you've made the risk report, would actually determine any risk management that may be put in place. And I think Annex 3 and the problem formulation approach are very compatible. And if I may share a few slides, how do I do that? I just click share. Vibha?
Yes, you can share.
Okay, so let's try that one.
Yeah. It is enabled.
Okay, so the problem formulation approach is, am I sharing now?
Yes, but make it slide view.
Yeah, I'm trying to get it bigger. Okay, the problem formulation approach defines your protection goals, but And then it tries to define the information that would be important in coming up with an initial risk characterization to draw your conclusion on whether significant risks occur or exist, or if you don't have enough information, you might want to identify this missing information. So the problem formulation approach is a process that tries to limit and focus your risk assessment. The first thing that we have seen there is the protection goal, and we have usually a high-level protection goal, which are general motherhood statements, which are very difficult to actually operationalize. And usually, I think the major setback in using the problem formulation approach is actually coming up with an operational protection goal that can be converted into a testable hypothesis that will identify the information required for a comprehensive risk characterization. So we see in this slide, high-level protection goal must have first be translated into an operational protection goal to be able to come up with a testable hypothesis. And so from a broad point of view, what the country is trying to protect, what the country policy is, we want to get into a very specific measurement endpoint, and this would be done for every aspect that the country may wish to protect, of course, based on its prioritization and based on its policy. So with that, we can have a quick example. If the policy protection goal is biodiversity, we have to limit that into or translate that into an operational protection goal. In here we see that, for example, I've defined the NTO or a particular non-target organism, and I say that my protection goal, operational protection goal, is that the LMO must not be more toxic to the non-target organism as compared to the counterpart conventional crop or counterpart non-LMO organism. To be able to define, if I had the word toxic, then I know that I would like to look at an assessment endpoint that defines toxicity. So I will define that as a toxicity of a novel component found in an LMO not present in the counterpart conventional crop. And so it immediately brings me to the hypothesis that protein X, for example, present in the LMO is going to be toxic to the organism that I wish to protect. And for that, it defines what kind of information I need. I may want to look at the toxicity data, an LD50 or an LD99, to see whether or not death or harm or reproductive reduction can occur for that particular organism that I really wish to protect. And so this one can be applied across all the different ranges of the products that will arise from genetic manipulations. So the LMO presence, for example, if it coincides with the MTO, I can find a pathway that will eventually lead to the harm of the MTO. For example, if I have this pathway where your particular LMO can actually cause harm to the MTO, then I'll be able to look at this and see whether or not I can break this pathway so that I can come up, for example, with a risk characterization that will say that the hazard may be there, but the exposure may be low if I can break this particular pathway. If the exposure is low, then I will characterize that as negligible or low risk. And so if it's negligible or low risk, I may not have to put in a lot of risk management systems in place. And if I can do that for all the things that I wish to protect, I will be able to come up with a risk estimate that will define the risk management systems that must be placed by the country that wishes to utilize this particular LMO. Okay, so with that, I'd like to present. I would like to, shall we say, I would like to say that the problem formulation approach is quite general. It addresses the case-to-case specificity required by the how do I stop this one? Stop share. It actually satisfies the case-to-case requirement that the Cartagena Protocol has actually defined for the characterizing risks according to the LMO that's being introduced to the environment. It also allows the country to be able to craft its own risk assessment approach based on its particular needs and based on its prioritization of what it intends to protect. It clarifies protection goals, and it also determines, after risk characterization, the risk management systems that must be put in place, if necessary, to be able to enable, for example, the productive use of the LMO that has been generated elsewhere. So thank you, and I'd be willing to address a few questions later on.
Thank you, Dr. Carino. for emphasizing that the problem formulation approach is very diverse, very broad, and can be applied. So I will move on to Dr. Felicity, who has been a member of the ACTEC and has seen, how the discussions proceed on, having available guidance to develop guidance for various LMOs. Dr. Felicity, as we all know, that GM crops have been the main, category of LMOs which have been assessed, for which the problem formulation approach has been applied. But your views on, how the LMOs and existing guidelines can be applied to all types of LMOs and not just GM crops. If you can, share your experiences on that.
Sure. Thank you, Vibha, and hello, everybody. So I've been asked to comment, as Vibha has just said, sort of in this context of new categories of LMOs, and I would like to contribute 3 main points to begin with. And these will reiterate and build upon some of the comments already made by my fellow panelists. So as Vibha mentioned, I've been in the RTEG for risk assessment in this current intersessional period and also the previous intersessional period, which resulted in the development of the additional voluntary guidance materials for LMOs containing engineered gene drives. In the current work, and also in historical work under the Cartagena Protocol in this area and other areas, and also under its parent convention on biological diversity, there has been a lot of discussion around scope. So, for example, the scope of the definitions, so of living modified organisms or LMOs, of biotechnology, of modern biotechnology, of synthetic biology, and therefore what the risk assessment provisions in the protocol apply to, and what sources of guidance exist and what they apply to. And as it's alluded to already, a driver of this has been sort of this continual evolution of biotechnology since the adoption of the Cartagena Protocol, and this is in the technologies themselves, in the resulting organisms, and in how they might be used, so in the potential applications. So all of this capability is now a lot broader than it was 20 to 30 years ago when the protocol was being drafted. I've mentioned synthetic biology, which is a different discussion under the convention. It has been quite active for a decade now. Different program of work, but there is overlap with risk assessment in the topics that are under discussion, and the technologies involved, the organisms and the applications. And that work on synthetic biology has considered scope and concluded that most of the organisms developed, including those developed using newer technologies, being technologies that have emerged post-adoption of the Cartagena Protocol, these continue to be LMOs as defined by the protocol. And as such, they remain subject to the provisions of the protocol, so including its risk assessment provisions. So the protocol is not limited to only those LMOs or technologies that existed at the time it was drafted. So as Vibha mentioned, at the time, predominantly this was LM plants or LM crops. But these definitions are broad and they remain applicable today. So that's my first point. My second point is that LMOs, organisms, this organisms is organisms. It's not limited to categories or particular groups of organisms. There is this view that the risk assessment provisions of the protocol and most existing guidance materials have been developed for plants because that is what was the predominant applications at the time. And generally we do have the most regulatory experience with these organisms, but the protocol is not limited to those or to terrestrial organisms or macroscopic organisms for that matter, nor is it limited to a particular group of technologies used to develop them. So I don't see sort of categories of LMOs. They're LMOs or they're not LMOs. And my third point, Dr. Carino was just talking about the broad applicability of the problem formulation approach, and I fully agree with her comments. So my perspective is that of a technology developer, in working in agricultural biotechnology, and we have regulated activities in countries throughout the world. So we have a lot of exposure to regulatory practices in different jurisdictions, including how risk assessments are done and the data requirements to address those risk assessments. So while a problem formulation approach is not explicitly set out in the risk assessment provisions of the protocol, it is an approach to implementing those provisions in a case-by-case manner, and it has been adopted in LMO environmental risk assessment and increasingly recognised as best practice for this. It is used in other regulatory areas, but it has been more slow to be adopted in this area of LMO environmental risk assessment. However, it is fully consistent with the general principles in Annex 3, and it provides the flexibility, as Dr. Carino was talking about, to be applied to any type of LMO. And this is irrespective of the type of organism or category, if you want to use that terminology, and also irrespective of the technology used to develop it. So if you followed the online forum on risk assessment in the current program of work, which was in April and May this year, you will have seen this statement made by several participants who are risk assessors or have had experience in doing environmental risk assessment with LMOs in regulatory agencies from around the world. They also pointed to the new additional voluntary guidance materials that set out the methodology of problem formulation. So this is the document that was developed for LMOs containing engineered gene drives, but its framework is not limited to that particular category of LMOs. So this is a guidance that can be used more broadly for implementing a problem formulation approach, and it can also be used as a capacity building tool for the methodology of problem formulation. So with that, I'll finish for now and hand back to you, Vibha.
Thank you, Dr. Felicity. So what I gather from your comments is that, LMOs are all LMOs, whether we produce using various technologies, synthetic biology, genetic engineering, and so on and so forth. The guidance can be applied for the regulatory assessments. But the most important thing that you pointed out was the need for regulatory experience. People need to know how to apply these guidelines and frameworks which are already available for the safety assessment of the LMOs, new LMOs. Of course, we'll discuss what do we mean by new categories a little later. But you raised a very important point about the capacity of the regulators, and I would like to share with the audience here and the panelists that in the substrat decision also there is a component on enhancing the capacity, and some efforts have been made from time to time by the Secretariat in conducting various meetings and so on and so forth. But the advances in the technologies and the Alex also mentioned about changes in the regulators, and from the Asian perspective, wherever we work, we really see a need for regulatory capacity building as a very, very important area on which a lot of efforts have to be made. So with this note, I would request, and in fact, this has been coming to us several times, and even our multi-country project, which is being steered by KIPABiC, and other initiatives like South Asia Biosafety Program, which we lead, we have repeatedly, noted that the capacity to apply the Annex 3 to the protocol for safety assessment and all is very much needed. Intensive efforts are required. That has been our experience, but I would move on to Dr. Bayarkhuu, who is from Mongolia and has participated in various negotiations also. And in the government process of setting up biosafety regulatory framework, on your views on the need for capacity building and how these issues can be dealt with, and also for deeper understanding of the risk assessment, and also how the collaborations, particularly regional collaborations, can play a role. Over to you, Dr. Bayarkhuu.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Vibha. Also, good morning and good afternoon. On behalf of regional developing countries, also I would like to share my perspective, which comes from more than 20 years experience in the capacity building at both national and regional levels. Also, I'm honored to represent the Biosafety Research Institute, Mongolia, to speak on the critical topic, the need for capacity building and regional collaboration in biosafety and risk assessment. As biotechnology and modern biotechnology rapidly advances, our biosafety systems must give this not only scientifically, but contextually. Risk assessment today is highly interdisciplinary, involving molecular biology, ecology, socioeconomic impacts, and legal considerations. Yet in developing countries like Mongolia and across our region, technical capacity remains still limited. Often we rely on external assessment that may not reflect local ecological and cultural contexts. Without the well-trained national risk assessors, our countries cannot make fully informed, credible, and transparent decisions. We need competent risk assessors who can apply internationally great methodologies and principles of problem formulation while adapting them to local contexts. Also, our first priority must be to build national and regional expertise tailored to our realities. For example, equally important is regional collaboration. No country can do this alone. Working together allows us to, for example, sharing expertise data, conduct joint training assessments, also harmonize regulatory approaches and build regional centers of excellence. Also, we have platforms like Asian Biosafety Family, along with support from CBD, FAO, and UNEP, KIPABiC are already advancing the vision, but more formal, sustained partnerships are needed. As a regional level, we need to go into forward, must we focus on, first of all, tailored training using real-world case studies. It is very related modern biotechnology, including genome editing, all things is that need. Second one is institutional capacity to perform independent, credible risk assessments. Last one is formal regional mechanisms for collaboration and shared decision-making. Moreover, our efforts must align with broader frameworks like the Homin Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, National Biodiversity Strategy Action Plans, and Global Biodiversity Standard. Integrating biosafety into national strategies and linking it with the RIO conventions ensures that our capacity building leads real biodiversity conservation outcomes. Finally, in my perspective, I would like to say our regional developing countries need to deepen our understanding of risk assessment and strengthening institutional capacity to conduct risk assessment and foster practical regional cooperation. Mongolia is committed to this shared goal, and we welcome collaboration to build biosafety system that's not only compliant, but effective, context-aware, and future-ready. That's my perspective, also on behalf of our regional developing countries perspective. And thank you. I cannot listen.
Sorry, I was on mute. Thank you, Dr. Baku, and you have very rightly raised this very important issue of capacity building. And we, as I mentioned, that several countries in Asian region have been asking for more capacity building efforts, the practical experience, and so on, instead of what you say need for multiple documents. But we have a very interesting comment from Dr. Piet van der Meer in our comment box. Pete is a very senior expert in the Carino protocol, and I can see that he has also suggested that the resources which are available needs to be really spent on areas like Carino on the issues related to the capacity building. I would like to move on to a very important issue on these topics which are selected. We have seen the living modified fish was earlier highlighted, and then it did not pass through this criteria, and then again it has appeared. So I would like to request two of our members, who are member of the ACTEC, to advise, share with us whether this process of analyzing through the ACTEC is sufficient time, or the analysis is in itself complete, or it should be there are other mechanisms like peer-reviewed studies or something like that. Stock taking of available methodologies needs to be taken in a more intensive manner, and so on and so forth, to be very clear on. Because after all, these topics have come through a process, as Dr. Lee has also pointed out in one of the answers. But is that process needs to be more elaborate, or what are your views on this particular issue? Over to Dr. Lee, and then to Dr. Felicity. Application of criteria for new documents, because the development of multiple guidance documents needs a lot of efforts. It's very easy to make a very long list of documents, but do you think the analysis of these topics should be more elaborate before we actually decide on these topics to be taken forward, or the process followed by ACTEC is what kind of a process?
Hello.
Yes.
Actually, I'm not sure I can understand exactly what you are saying, but the scope of the main scope of the Carino protocol is that the case by case risk assessment. Is it correct? Yep. And
yes.
So the key of since all again all this conflict is come from that emerging biotech issues like synthetic biology or GEOs or gene drive that everything can be covered by the synthetic biology products. But anyway, the key is we don't know what could be found in future and produced or developed in future. We have no idea. For example, in gene drive case, it is kind of cannot be imagined in like 20 years ago at all. It is totally new issues, and the most big problem is, for example, the gene drive mosquitoes case. It can change the entire mosquito. It can finish all the mosquito in finally, for something like that. So, in my opinion, that we need like a guidance, developing guideline is required, since this LMO itself is changing. That type of products and species, host species, and everything is changing. So we didn't, since we don't know what is the risk. So we should understand if something happens, if some product is coming out in the market or on the developing or before regulation, we should at least understand what is it the risk. So that is the problem, problem formulation and risk identification steps. So it should be required for me.
Yes, yes, I agree with you that problem formulation, pre-market risk assessment is very much required, and that is done by all the risk assessors. Some of us, Dr. Flerida, myself, and some others, I'm sure there are many regulators in the process. So it is all a case-by-case assessment, and a very, very systematic process is followed while doing the risk assessment. The genes or the, like Dr. Carino mentioned about the problem formulation approach, detailed dossiers are prepared, and so on and so forth. So maybe some of our, the research community sometimes is not very well aware of, the processes which are followed. So maybe I would like to move on to Felicity for this and a little more understanding on the details of the discussions. But before that, Alex has raised his hand. Alex, would you like to say something?
Thank you, Vibha. That is why SBSTTA is there.
Yes, very much.
SBSTTA is not a negotiation. So, for instance, as my colleague from Korea said, a lot of scientists are beginning to think that the scope of, for instance, the definition for LMO may have to be looked at. Now, people who are going to SBSTTA go with evidence. These are the publications, these are the issues, and based upon what is there, comparing, we need to do A, B, C, D. With evidence, that is not a negotiation. If scientists then also verify through assessments, then that recommendation can be made. Case by case, why do you do case by case issues? And why is there a need for additional guidelines? We have checked an S3. This new genetically modified, or these new engineered organisms, A, B, C, D of the S3 is not available. I've done some work, checked the hypothesis, and these are the publications. And based upon that, we are suggesting that we add 1, 2, 3 as additional voluntary guidelines. Unfortunately, the world sometimes talk about issues, but there's no evidence. That is not a negotiation. These are the things that SBSTTA could recommend for further review and negotiation by COP. So I think you go with scientific evidence, peer-reviewed generation and teachers. Because if you look at 24, you are going to give scientific advice. So I think that is where SBSTTA comes in. But the need for evidence is extremely critical. Thank you.
Right. Thank you so much for clarifying. And this is what my exact question was to Felicity, that the scientific requirements or the evaluation or the evidence which is used for recommending such topics is, how robust it is, because we are looking at the parties are going to recommend these, and we are looking at spending a lot of resources on development of these guidelines and how useful they are. And most importantly, are the existing guidelines insufficient to handle these particular new topics which have been suggested, like LM fish, LM microorganisms, and so on and so forth. Over to you. And any other mechanisms that you feel should be followed before, such topics are recommended by the parties. Thank you.
So I guess maybe to step back a little bit to go back to what the program of work did. So mostly the risk assessment program of work has been mostly completed this year, beginning with the parties submitting their needs and priorities for further guidance materials. And with those submissions, there was the instruction to address certain criteria, which you referred to, Vibha. So these are criteria that are set out in a MOP 9 decision, defined by parties. So these are for the identification and prioritization of specific issues of risk assessment of living modified organisms that may warrant consideration. So these include a number of things, criteria that need to be fulfilled, like being in scope of the protocol. I talked about scope a bit earlier. Also a clear explanation of how the issue challenges existing risk assessment frameworks, with existing guidance, existing methodologies. And there were 12 submissions from parties, and from these the Secretariat extracted 15 topics, and these were the basis for the work of the RTEG. So the RTEG met in July. Also prior to that, there was more information collected through an online discussion series in April and May. So with the RTEG, its mandate was to apply those criteria, drawing on all of the information that had been submitted, and prepare a list of prioritised topics, if any, for further guidance material development. And the RTEG did this, and it produced a list. As Vibha's alluded to, there are a number of things on that list. There are 7 topics prioritised for the development of additional guidance materials. For 4 of them, it's a full guidance document. So like the additional voluntary guidance that we have for LMOs containing engineered gene drives. And for 3 of them, technical notes are recommended. Not really clear what these are. This is something that would need to be defined, but the working understanding in the RTEG was that these would be practical supplements that would supplements to existing guidance, so that this is for addressing specific challenges or contexts. So the next step is then for those RTEG recommendations to be considered by SBSTTA. So I would say that those recommendations need to be considered in context. There are 173 parties to the protocol. There were 12 that made submissions. This is not a very large or strong sort of party engagement here. There were 24 parties, including those 12 that participated in the online forum. In the RTEG, there were 13 participating. So the outcomes of the work, as reflected by the RTEG report, they're not broadly representative of the parties. SBSTTA 27 will be the first time that a majority of the parties and a bigger group of experts will consider what was done in this work and the outcomes. And those outcomes, as Alex explained, will be recommendations for MOP 12. Those recommendations can end up being quite different to the recommendations in the RTEG report once it goes through this consideration at SBSTTA 27. And speaking very frankly, there are recommendations in the RTEG report that might have been strongly advocated for by one or very few parties throughout this work. So developing a guidance for a topic requested by one or very few parties, this is it's a substantial investment of time and resources. It shouldn't be underestimated, particularly where the program does not have strong engagement. In my view, the RTEG of the previous intersessional period that developed the additional voluntary guidance materials for LMOs containing engineered gene drives, this was quite an exceptional group in that there was strong engagement and a goal shared by the majority of the group to produce a comprehensive, forward-looking document that could be used for any type of LMO and in capacity building. And this was a substantial amount of work. Anybody involved in that RTEG could attest to this. They spent months of their time, in addition to their jobs, for free, to develop one guidance. The current RTEG recommendations are for 7 times this work. This is substantial, and realistically, it would be not one intersessional period, but multiple intersessional periods stretching into the future. And yet the question is who is going to be available to participate in all of that work and have that result in a good quality work like we already have. Especially when we have this prevailing view that the existing additional voluntary guidance can be used. So I think there has to be more effective ways, and Dr. Bayarkhuu has just listed several for capacity building, rather than developing multiple guidance documents for every topic submitted by a party. A second point, and I'll try to be faster. What the RTEC did was a very quick application of the criteria. It's described as a structured analysis in the report, but it was, a meeting is only 4 days long. There were 15 topics. There wasn't time for a really deep consideration or analysis of every criterion. And I think that this is really needed before there could be a conclusion that we need to develop more guidance. This is really needed to identify if there really are gaps and what they really are and the most effective way of addressing them. So this, for example, could be addressed by commissioning a focus study for any of the topics where there is strong parties consensus that there really is that need. In many cases, the challenges raised in the program of work are actually questions that would be examined when doing the risk assessment, rather than issues that challenge risk assessment frameworks per se. For example, questions related to biology or life cycle of an organism. Also, the criteria, they include a stock taking exercise, and this was only very quickly considered by the RTEC, and in particular, it didn't examine resources and experience beyond international sources or those contributed through the information collection activities in the work. So there are topics that are prioritized that have been assessed previously, or guidance has been developed for them. There are scientific publications addressing many of these aspects of risk assessment that were raised as issues in this work. So that indicates there is some level of experience and that relevant resources exist. And all of this has not really been considered in a focused or in-depth way. So in my view, that is really necessary before proceeding on a massive program of work to develop many new guidance materials.
Thank you so much, Dr. Felicity. And as you were explaining the whole process and, the need for, different kind of approaches for the risk assessment, I think it was very clear that the capacity building is the key. There is a lack of capacities, and definitely, which results in actually a lack of participation. Out of 173 parties, only 12 parties, giving their comments and highlighting these points. And that too, several of those topics not being accepted further, and then, still being discussed and so on. And so clearly stresses on the need for very much, what I would say, the spending the resources for equipping the parties in first application of the existing documents, and then later on evaluating what exactly is required. But I would also like to ask Dr. Carino a very short question, before I move on to one or two questions from the audience. That what does this new category mean? How do you actually people, what should be the assessment process even before the parties start recommending this? The kind of discussion we have, or many times what we see is, since you work in the Philippines and you also interacted with a lot of countries in Asia, sometimes what we see is that the lack of capacities in your own countries, or things that you are not able to handle, are just posted as the requirement of new guidance. What exactly do we mean by new categories? How they are perceived by the stakeholders.
I'd like to make a comment with respect to the capacity building aspect first. I think capacity building is not going to be addressed by multiple documents that can be crafted if, for example, the problem formulation is already quite applicable to a wide variety of LMOs, regardless of how they were actually crafted. I think capacity should be built on how to actually use a problem formulation approach. Like, well, I think the major difficulty is actually translating a policy protection goal into a testable hypothesis. Capacity should also be built in prioritizing what is really the effect that you would what adverse effect is likely to be seen if you have an LMO introduced into a particular environment. Multiple documents is not going to address that issue. If you have a document, let's say on algae, it's not going to address, let's say, the blue-green versus the green algae versus the ones that are in the marine ecosystem. Because of a case-to-case approach is required to be able to do a risk assessment on all these different organisms. The problem formulation approach, it gives you enough flexibility to deal with various environments and various species with various traits. And that is, I think, what is most important. Actually looking at a particular LMO, identifying what harm it can possibly do, and then trying to see whether or not you can come up with a rational hypothesis on how to be able to see what kind of exposure is going to happen, what kind of damages will occur, and apply that to your particular environment. I think that is the major flaw when you have to come up with multiple documents that will address general issues anyway. So if it's as general as what we've had, like the one in Mexico, the one that we actually had tried to negate in Mexico because it was done by not by the Secretariat and not approved by the parties, if it's as broad as that, it's not going to be meaningful. And it's not going to be applicable to multiple situations. Like we haven't even addressed the marine ecosystem. If you have to come up with a particular guidance document for the marine ecosystem, a particular guidance for cave environments and so on and so forth, we'll end up with multiple documents that will lead us to nowhere. But practicing and actually coming up with the ability to focus a risk assessment to what really counts based on our policy protection goals, I think, would be more important than coming up with 101 little documents that may soon contradict each other anyway. So that's my take on this particular aspect. I think resources are better spent by allowing countries to help each other out, to handheld each other. Hand-holding may actually help so that a country that has done an assessment before utilizing the problem formulation approach may be able to hold the hand of another country who's just starting out on this approach to risk assessment. Looking at guidance documents, sharing where information would be found, and utilizing the information sources that will be found in so many different sites in the internet without spending so much money crafting a document that will be general in any way. So that's my take on the ATEGs, on the aspects that have been identified in there. One problem I have, since Mexico, that's I think COP9, COP8, and then we went into Egypt. In the Egypt document, there's already a set of criteria that has been set for coming up with new documents. If that criteria, those criteria have actually been applied meticulously, I don't think we'll have so many requests for additional documents. I think there is a point where each party or each country should actually look at its own priorities and come up with its own assessment based on what is most important for it to protect. And so that's my take on it. There is a specific case where a particular risk assessment paradigm is going to apply, and the problem formulation can help clarify that kind of a risk assessment that will eventually be crafted for that particular LMO in a particular environment for a particular trait. So that's my take on it.
Thank you very much. But that's what I was trying to ask Felicity about, the process of even applying these criteria, because this is a unique case. You are also aware that LM fish first appeared, then it was not accepted, and then it has reappeared. So this is something which we were very surprised at when we saw the ACTEC recommendations. So I think you are very right. Maybe more time is required to do a proper stock taking of the available resources for any particular topic, both at the level of the parties who suggest such topics, and also both at the level of AgTech, and so that all these systems are put in place. So there is a little discussion going on in the chat box. I think Dr. Lee made a comment about the impact on mosquitoes, and then we have a lot of clarifications. So here again, I would like to stress, and maybe share with the audience here that, the risk assessment, as we have undertaken limited experience that we have, the guidance frameworks only provide the guidance, and then you have to have a lot of resources before you reach to any conclusion. So if there is a mosquito or anything, there are very nice resources like consensus documents provided by the OECD on each topic. So for example, on Anopheles and other things which provide you a very detailed data on what is the biology of that organism and how it is going to behave, having our operational points and so on and so forth. And then, there won't be debates like, that Anopheles cannot breed, or this can breed, or this can happen, and so on. So supplementing to the available guidance, the framework, is the requirement of a lot of other resources, for which the scientific resources which scientific bodies are already working on. And I think that work is very, very valuable, rather than, as Flerida said, of course, this is my point of view, than having multiple guidances, but the scientific information is required more than that. We have in the chat box maybe one or two quick questions, because we are almost crossing the time. In fact, I would also like to say, Dr. Felicity, like there's a question to you on, please advise what risk assessment, risk minimization, and mitigation strategies should be adopted for new GM crops and new LMOs for their import and environmental release into the country like India. Like, I would like to have your take on that, how, such questions can be addressed using the existing framework itself. Maybe your take on this.
That's a good question. I can try. Not being an expert in the regulatory processes in India at the moment, a number of years ago, I did do some work there. So it depends on the regulatory framework that you have in place. A new GM crop, how is that different to something that may not be considered a new GM crop through the existing regulatory process? At a high level, I think that this would be managed in the same way as an older GM crop, and undergo environmental risk assessment in the same manner. Presumably that is in a way that's consistent with Annex 3 of the Cartagena Protocol. If this was something that was presenting like a trait or a type of crop that was not assessed previously, so didn't have that familiarity or history of use, then there may be additional questions you may want to address with that, and additional sources of information you might seek to address questions within the risk assessment. But the risk assessment framework should remain applicable, and applying that through a problem formulation approach, irrespective of what the LMO is, should remain applicable. So that would be my response at a high level. That assessment would then determine, would lead to determining what would be an appropriate proportionate risk management strategies, if necessary.
Thank you, Dr. Felicity. There is a comment from Bangladesh saying that, many Asian countries face a lot of similar challenges, and how can the ongoing UNEP-JEF multi-country project help strengthen regional cooperation in RARM of new LMOs through shared databases, capacity building, or harmonized guidelines? Of course, Dr. Jang is here, and I would request him also to comment on it. But since I am also closely associated with this project, I would like to conclude on this note that, these are the kind of activities which are required for strengthening, at the regional level, and at the global level, what we spoke about as the capacity building, shared databases or resources like the biology documents, harmonized guidelines, and this project has in itself, has several activities in the pipeline which would contribute to this. And when we started, we said that, there was a comment here that African countries have been discussing and they had a certain view together, but in Asia, there has not been a common platform. And I would like to compliment, before I conclude, to KIPABiC for organizing this webinar. And, they are very active in the region, and several partner countries have requested for similar activities. And I would encourage all the participants, if they have certain actions in mind which can be facilitated, I'm sure we can always request whatever is best possible to Dr. Jang and his team to take forward. I think with this, I would like to thank all the panelists for their comments. We do have some takeaways on more emphasis on capacity building rather than the guidance documents. But this is just a discussion forum. This webinar was just to enlighten about what are the issues to be discussed in SBSTTA and familiarize. And we request you to, get back to your country negotiating teams who would be taking up your views and for further discussion in the SBSTTA and the COP. With this, I would like to once again thank all our panelists, Dr. Alex and Dr. Jang, for giving me this opportunity to moderate. And over to you, Dr. Jang. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, especially Dr. Vibha, who played a wonderful role of moderating our session. Well, still, there would remain many topics or questions still unanswered, or even questions just in your mind. But I think this is the final event that we can utilize for our quest for future. So let's make this event just as one opportunity to make us familiar with the relevant issues. And well, finally, I would like to say thank you very much for staying with us until the end of today's session. Well, we have rich and intensive deliberations, and I hope the discussions have been useful to you. At KIPABiC, like Dr. Vibha mentioned, we are very open to receiving requests from countries across Asia, and we remain committed to supporting you in addressing pressing biosafety topics, such as this one on RARM. We are here to serve as a platform that fosters dialogue, builds capacity, and amplifies the Asian voice at the global level. We will continue to organize capacity building initiatives of this kind and warmly invite you to engage with us on areas when support is needed. You may share via the feedback option at the end of this webinar or write to us. As we close, I wish to sincerely thank all our distinguished speakers, panelists, and participants for your valuable contributions and advice engagement. With this, I officially close our webinar, and I extend my best wishes for your active involvement at the upcoming SBSTTA, as well as for your ongoing efforts to strengthen biosafety in your countries and beyond. Wishing you all a pleasant rest of your day or evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. And thank you to all the panelists. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.